We talk about what to sell. And I want 4 elements in the products I want to sell. You want it to be unique. So the more unique the product is, the less competition. So for example, when I was selling fitness, it's not really that unique. It doesn't always have to hit all 4 of these, but the closer you get to hitting all 4, the better it's going to be. You want it to be expensive, so you can sell it for a high price. It's just an easier way to grow your businesses. You want it to be sticky. And then finally, you want it to be cheap to deliver. And then you have to think about how easy or hard it is to scale. So on this side, we'll have easy. And on this side, we will have hard. For example, if you sell protein bars, it costs almost nothing to add a new customer. So it's very easy to scale. If you sell ads like Facebook, it costs almost nothing to have an additional customer. So again, it's very easy to scale. If you sell a book, it costs almost nothing to bring on a customer. So again, very easy to scale. But if you run one of the businesses I have with consulting, it costs a lot to bring on an additional customer compared to these other businesses. And it's harder to scale because of expertise. But the caveat you want to understand is that usually businesses that are easier to scale take a lot more capital up front or are usually harder to get a customer. Less scalable businesses over here, the hard ones, have the inverse problem where it's usually easier to get a customer, but it's harder to deliver quality. So think law firms or accounting or consulting where it takes a lot of expertise from your team to help clients, but it's actually fairly easy to get a customer because so many people need help with those things. And now we move on to level 2 where we have to start getting them to buy. So 2 things need to occur here for us to be successful. First, they find out about you, and then second, we get them to buy. Now you have 4 ways they find out about you. The first is what I call warm outreach. The second will be cold outreach. The third will be content. And then we have paid ads. But if we really break it down, it's really 2 ways. We have organic, which is going to be these right here. Or we have paid ads, which obviously is going to be paid. Now, here are some of the numbers you want to look for if you're starting to do lead generation. So let's pretend we're doing warm outreach. Now, let's define warm outreach as anyone who is following you on your social media pages. So let's say you send 100 DMs a day, right? That's just a good number, right? The rule of 100 is a good number to start building your business. And usually we'll say 20 an hour so you don't get a spam block. All right. Meaning if you've ever gone on Instagram or Facebook and you just start sending people a million messages, they will start limiting how many messages you do typically if you go over that, right? Because they're trying to limit spam on their platforms. So if I send 100 DMs, usually I want about a 30% response rate. So meaning I will get 30 people who respond. And if I'm good at booking sales calls, from that number, I'm going to try to get at least 5 calls booked. And in a perfect scenario, from that, maybe I get 1 to 2 sales calls closed. These would be the typical numbers you'd look for in warm outreach. Now, the cool part about this is if you're selling a $3,000 product, okay, and let's say you made 1 sale and you did 100 DMs a day at 20 an hour, that would take you plus the sales call. We'll add these sales calls in. So 5 hours here for the DMs. You do 5 hours here for the sales calls. And so you would do 3,000 divided by 10, you are making $300 an hour. And that's why selling stuff at a higher price is more beneficial because you can put in a lot of effort, but you get paid handsomely for that effort. Most of you probably are not making $300 an hour. And so when you look at this scenario, it makes a lot of sense to do that as long as you can close 1 or maybe 2 deals. Now, if we go to cold outreach is a little bit harder, meaning these are people who don't follow you. So it's an absolute stranger. So you're reaching out to them. They have no idea who you are. They're wondering why you're reaching out to them in the first place. So it makes it a little bit harder. So if we take that same scenario where we do 100 DMs at 20 an hour, and then we would get usually a 10% response rate. So it's going to be much lower. So I would have to send 100 DMs, but I might only get 10 people to respond. Could be as high as 20%, but typically I would say 10 because I like to get lower numbers for people's expectations rather than higher numbers. And let's say you book 3 calls and maybe you close 1. Maybe you don't even close 1. Maybe you'd have to do 300 DMs to close 1 deal. And so if you have these expectations, however, then it makes it easy to win because a lot of times when I see people struggle in business, they don't know what these numbers should be. They just, they'll hear people saying, here's what you should do, here's what you should do, but they don't know if they're doing a good job or not because they don't know what numbers to expect. If you were doing this, these are going to be great numbers And you can make a lot of money even if you're reaching out to strangers. In fact, I was doing around $50,000 a month between cold outreach and warm outreach before I ever ran any type of paid ads. The next thing is content. I'm not going to go really deep into content, but what I will say is I think posting content is good so that people who are on your page can see if what you have to sell is relevant to them. But trying to post content with the hope of going viral, I don't think is a great strategy. You have what I consider content creators who are great at content but don't understand business. And then you have business owners who are really good at running a business, but they don't usually go as viral. I would rather be a business owner and figure content out later than try to be a creator and then figure out business. It's much easier for me to bring value to the marketplace as a business owner than it is as a content creator because that's all they can actually do. The fourth thing then is paid ads. Now with paid ads, the numbers you can expect are going to partially depend on what you're selling, but I'll give you two different scenarios. Either you're selling something that's considered B2C. B2C would be a consumer. So if you're selling shoes or sneakers or protein bars, it's straight to the consumer. Or you're selling something that's B2B, which is obviously to the business. And so numbers for this would usually be in the same range where if you spend $1,000 on ads, for B2C, usually you'll get $10 leads. B2B, you might get $20 leads, all right? Because there's less business owners than there are consumers. And if I had $1,000 at $10 leads, that would mean I get 100 leads total. And then in business, usually what you'll see is what we call the law of 10. And I'll show you that. So here you would have 50 leads. Okay. And then you're going to have the law of 10. So typically, if out of 100 leads, if you can get 10% of those people to book a call, that is a good metric. Here, you'd have 5 people book a call. And then usually you want at least 10% of those calls to close. So here you'd have 1 close, and over here you might have 0, right? 0 to 1, because we probably would have to spend another $1,000. Now, with B2C, usually it's a lower price point. So this might be $2,000 product or $3,000 product. With B2B, it might be $5,000 or $6,000 product. But again, the reason I'm showing this to you is so you know what numbers to expect. Half the time when I'm working with one of my clients and I'm helping consult on their business, they don't know what the metrics should be for their business, so they get very stressed and overwhelmed, not knowing if they're doing a good or bad job. If you go through this part of the video and you have these numbers written down, then if you're within KPI, you know you're doing a great job. If you're not within KPI, then you should know what you need to fix.